What would you do if after 50 years of marriage, your husband looked you in the eye over morning coffee and said, "I want a divorce," then walked out the door with a packed suitcase and another woman waiting? That's exactly what happened to Margaret Wilson. She devoted her entire life to building a family and a business beside the man she trusted most, only to be blindsided by betrayal in her 70s. But what her husband didn't know was that he had once given her a legal weapon that could change everything. This isn't just a story of heartbreak, it's a gripping tale of quiet revenge, emotional justice, and one woman's stunning transformation after being left behind. Stay with us because what Margaret does next will leave you speechless and might just make you cheer. Margaret Maggie Wilson had always believed that love, real love, could survive anything. After all, she and Richard had made it through 5 decades together, 3 kids, 7 grandchildren, a modest house in Maplewood, New Jersey, and a business they built from the ground up. They had faced health scares, recessions, and every up and down life could throw at them, but nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared her for that morning. It was a clear April morning, the kind where the sun gleams just right through the kitchen window, catching in the steam of freshly brewed coffee. Maggie had woken early as always. She was humming an old Simon and Garfunkel tune as she poured the coffee, set out the toast, and gently stirred Richard's favorite oatmeal, just like she'd done every day for 50 years. But that morning he didn't smile. He didn't even meet her eyes. Richard sat down slowly, wearing his usual gray cardigan. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the mug, then stopped halfway. "I need to talk to you," he said. Maggie froze. The tone, it wasn't gentle, wasn't tired, wasn't routine. It was rehearsed, cold, final. "What's wrong?" she asked, lowering the spoon into the oatmeal bowl. He didn't look up. His gaze stayed fixed on the coffee steam rising between them. "I can't keep doing this, Maggie. I want a divorce." The world stopped. She stared at him, her heartbeat thudding like a distant drum. "A divorce," she whispered. Richard exhaled long and heavy, like he'd been carrying those words for months. "We've been living like strangers for years. There's no passion, no connection." Maggie laughed, but it came out hollow bitter. "We're 73 years old, Richard. We have 3 children, grandchildren. You're talking about passion." His silence was the loudest answer she'd ever heard. "Is there someone else?" she finally asked, though her stomach already knew the answer. He hesitated. "Maggie. Her name is Diane. Diane Carter. She's someone I met at the chess club in Manhattan." "The chess club," Maggie said, voice cracking. "You met her over a bishop and a pawn." "She's 62, he added, as if the 11-year age difference somehow made this betrayal more palatable. "It's not about age. It's, with her, I feel something I haven't felt in a long time." Maggie couldn't move. Her fingers were clenched around the edge of the table, like she might fall off the earth if she let go. She hadn't noticed the packed suitcase at the door until he stood and walked toward it. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked, voice barely audible. "A few months," he admitted, avoiding her eyes. Maggie's vision blurred as tears stung her eyes. 50 years. 50 years reduced to a single suitcase and a coffee left untouched. He turned at the door. "I'll be staying with Diane for a while until I find my own place. I've already spoken with Robert Grant. He'll help us sort the divorce." Robert, their friend, the same man who had toasted to their 40th anniversary, who'd held their granddaughter at her baptism. Richard continued, voice distant. "The house is under both our names. We'll have to sell and split it. Same with the apartment in Manhattan. And the business. I'll call you so we can divide things fairly." Then he kissed her cheek. Cold, dismissive. The door clicked shut behind him. Maggie didn't move for hours. The sunlight shifted. The coffee turned cold. And she sat there, heart cracked in a way that felt louder than any sound in the world. That night, she lay in their bed alone for the first time in 50 years. His side was still warm but empty. Her mind wandered back through decades, their wedding in Charleston, the first house they bought in Queens, the birth of their children, the holidays, the laughter, the arguments, the makeups. She cried. She cried like the 23-year-old bride she once was, raw, broken, abandoned. But as the hours passed, something inside her shifted. The grief didn't disappear, but it hardened into something sharper, something steadier. Anger. How dare he? How could Richard just erase everything they'd built? everything she had given up to chase the thrill of someone new. After 50 years of shared sacrifices now, she was just a line item in a divorce. That night a whisper rose inside her. No. By morning she wasn't the same woman. She stood before the mirror, face pale, eyes swollen, but a steel had returned to her spine. No, Richard, she said aloud to her reflection. You don't get to rewrite this story. The following week was agony. Their children, Andrew, David, and Emily, took turns visiting, trying to comfort her. Maggie tried to smile, tried to pretend she was okay, but inside she was calculating. Andrew, her oldest, asked gently over Sunday lunch. Mom, have you spoken to a lawyer? Yet I know your dad's with Robert, she said, her tone clipped. Maybe I should find someone of my own. David leaned forward. You can't use the same attorney. That's a conflict of interest. I'll refer someone from my firm. And Emily, eyes full of tears, whispered, he can't just leave you like this. You gave up your whole life for him. Maggie didn't answer. She didn't want her children in the crossfire, but their concern gave her something she hadn't had in days: validation, power. 2 days later, Maggie sat across from a sharp-eyed divorce attorney named Thomas Bailey in a quiet midtown office. He listened. He took notes. And then when she finished, he said, before we plan strategy, I need you to go home and gather everything. Documents, records, contracts. If your husband is the kind of man I think he is, we need to move fast. Men like him don't just walk away, they cover their tracks. That night, Maggie unlocked the safe in their basement. As she sifted through decades of files, she found something astonishing. A power of attorney, signed 15 years ago. Right before Richard's heart surgery. A document giving Maggie full control over every aspect of Richard's legal and financial life. And the best part, it had no expiration date. She stared at it, heart racing, fingers trembling. He'd forgotten. He never revoked it. And just like that, the story changed. She smiled for the first time in days, not because she was happy, but because for once the ending wasn't his to write. I'm so sorry to pause the story right here, but I promise next part will be even more intense. Tell me, what would you have done in Maggie's place? Do you believe in justice or revenge after a betrayal like this? Also, where are you watching this from? I'd love to know what country you're in. And please, if this story moved you, even just a little, drop a heart like this video and help us share Maggie's journey with the world. Maggie sat at her kitchen table with the document in front of her hands, trembling not from fear, but from something far stronger: power. For the first time since Richard had walked out, she held something real, tangible, legally binding, the power of attorney signed in shaky handwriting by Richard 15 years ago, before his heart surgery gave her full control over his legal and financial affairs. It had no expiration date, no conditions, and most importantly, he had completely forgotten it existed. She stared at his signature, remembering the day he handed her the pen in that sterile hospital room. Just in case anything happens, he had said softly. I trust you. Trust. Now that trust would be his undoing. The next morning, Maggie returned to Thomas Bailey's office, her lips tight, eyes sharp. She slid the document across his desk. Bailey's eyebrows rose. He read it once, then again. His voice dropped to a near whisper. You realize what this means, I do, Maggie said. The question is, what do we do next? Bailey leaned back, fingers steepled. Legally, this gives you enormous control. You could transfer assets, sell property, change account ownership. But using this during a divorce proceeding is risky. If a judge believes it's being used to gain an unfair advantage, he could reverse the actions, or worse. Maggie didn't blink. Then we do it before the divorce proceedings formally begin. Bailey studied her. You're not the woman he walked out on 3 weeks ago, are you? No, she said coldly. That woman cried. This one plans. What followed were 2 of the most meticulous, high-stakes weeks of Maggie's life. She met with Peter Thompson, their family accountant of over 30 years. Peter, initially hesitant, listened as Maggie outlined everything: Richard's betrayal, the power of attorney, and her plan. Peter rubbed his temples. Maggie, you're walking a tightrope. I've walked one my entire marriage, she replied. Only difference now is I'm not holding his hand anymore. Together they started moving assets, not all at once, not obviously. Maggie transferred funds from joint accounts into a new trust in her name. She rerouted automatic payments, reclassified stocks. But the biggest move, the company, Wilson Hardware and Supply had grown from a single dusty corner store to a 5-location chain. Maggie had handled the books for decades, though Richard had always been the public face. He owned 65% of the shares. Maggie owned 20%. The remaining 15% belonged to their children. Transferring the shares directly from Richard's name to hers would be too obvious. Instead, under Peter's advice, Maggie created a holding company, a clean legal entity in her name. Then, using the power of attorney, she had Richard sell his shares to the holding company for a fair price on paper. Payment structured in small installments across 20 years. She now owned 85% of the business. Richard. He had a future IOU, and still no word from him. According to Emily, Richard had moved in with Diane in Brooklyn Heights. He seems happy, she had said, avoiding her mother's eyes. But he hasn't asked much about the business or the finances. Of course he hadn't. He thought the divorce would be clean, neat, predictable, until it wasn't. 3 weeks after the suitcase slammed shut and Richard left, Maggie received the call she'd been expecting. Margaret came, the voice of Robert Grant, their longtime family attorney, now officially Richard's lawyer. We'd like to initiate formal divorce proceedings. Richard has submitted a list of assets he considers part of the marital estate. Maggie almost laughed. Of course. Let me prepare my documents. When would you like to meet? Friday? 10 a.m. My office. I'll be there. That night, Maggie didn't sleep. She reviewed every transfer, every document, every signature. Peter came over to double-check. Thomas reviewed it all 3 times. It's legally airtight, he assured her. But emotionally, prepare yourself. Friday morning, Maggie dressed with care. A tailored navy blue suit, light blush, pearl earrings Richard had given her for their 30th anniversary. The only weapon she needed now was dignity. When she walked into Robert Grant's office, Richard was already seated at the polished oak table. He looked thinner, paler. His hair had grayed noticeably, but his expression confident, until she placed her folder on the table. Robert began reading Richard's list aloud. Properties, bank accounts, business shares, all stated as if still intact. Maggie said nothing. When he finished, she calmly opened her folder and handed him a very different list. The room went silent. Robert scanned the documents, flipping pages faster, his brows climbing. Wait. These are all in your name now. Richard sat forward. What the hell is this? Maggie looked at him, voice steady. This is me protecting 50 years of my life. Richard's jaw clenched. You had no right, I had legal right, she interrupted. Power of attorney, you signed it. You never revoked it. But that was for your use if I was incapacitated. Maggie leaned in. It didn't say that. And legally, that distinction doesn't exist. Robert looked panicked. This could be considered misuse. Thomas Bailey cut in smoothly. Everything was executed legally, with full documentation. You're welcome to challenge it in court. But that could take years, and it won't change much. Richard turned to Maggie, fury replaced by disbelief. You outplayed me. She met his gaze without blinking. No, Richard, I survived you. I know I hate to stop here, but trust me, what happens next will leave you breathless. If you were in Maggie's position, would you have done the same? Do you think Richard deserves forgiveness, or has he earned his downfall? And hey, where are you watching this story from? Let me know your country below. I'd love to hear from you. If this story pulled at your heart or made you cheer for Maggie, don't forget to tap that heart and like the video. Your support helps bring more stories like this to life. For weeks after the confrontation in Robert Grant's office, silence hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Richard had said nothing. No angry emails, no lawsuit threats, no late-night calls begging for reconsideration. Just silence. But Maggie knew better. She knew the silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. Richard had always been the man who calculated before he struck, and now with most of the assets legally out of his reach, he was recalibrating. Sure enough, it came. A month later, Thomas Bailey rang her one morning. Richard's legal team has filed a formal challenge. They're claiming abuse of power of attorney. We expected this. Maggie exhaled her coffee, cooling in her hand. How strong is their case? Emotionally persuasive. Legally weak. You acted within your rights, but it could drag out. Let them drag, she said. I've spent 50 years waiting on his timeline. I can wait a little longer on mine. But waiting wasn't all she did. With the company now in her control, Maggie threw herself into the business. Wilson Hardware and Supply wasn't just a family name anymore. It was her legacy. She modernized the inventory systems, hired a young marketing team, and launched an online store. Revenue rose 14% in the first quarter under her leadership. Her children, especially Andrew and Emily, stood in awe. Even David, who had stayed cautiously loyal to Richard, began to see his mother in a new light. "You're kind of a badass, Mom," he said one Sunday over dinner. Maggie just smiled and passed him the mashed potatoes. Still, the divorce battle loomed in the background, casting long shadows over her progress. Then one rainy morning, the call came. Mrs. Wilson Thomas said, voice unusually calm, "Richard wants to settle." Maggie froze. Settle. He's proposing a quiet resolution. In exchange for dropping the lawsuit, he's asking for a modest monthly pension and the right to live in the Upper West Side apartment. She hesitated. That's it. He's also requesting no public disclosure, no interviews, no memoirs. Maggie let out a small laugh. He's worried about embarrassment. He's worried about legacy, Thomas replied, and maybe pride. Later that evening, as the thunder rolled above Maplewood, Maggie sat alone at the dining table, papers spread out, wine glass half full. The man who had once stood by her side for 5 decades now sat in another burrow, older, thinner, and defeated. She thought of their first home in Queens, the night they danced barefoot in the kitchen after getting approved for a mortgage. The afternoon she found out she was pregnant and couldn't stop crying, half from joy, half from fear. She thought of the woman she used to be, soft-spoken, devoted, a partner in the truest sense, and the woman she had become, fierce, forged in betrayal, not broken, but rebuilt. She picked up the phone and called Thomas. "Tell them I accept, but on 3 conditions, name them. 1, I'll increase the pension by 10%. 2, the apartment goes fully back in his name, not just usage rights." Thomas hesitated. "That's generous. It's necessary. He needs to know I'm not here to destroy him. And the 3rd, full medical coverage for the rest of his life, and it comes from the company's profits." There was a pause. Then Thomas asked gently, why Maggie's voice didn't shake. "Because I loved him once, and I don't need to win to feel strong. I just need peace." When Richard heard the terms, he signed without protest. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was relief. Maybe he finally saw what she had seen all along, that strength wasn't in taking, but in letting go with dignity. Months passed. The settlement faded into memory. Wilson Hardware grew. Maggie was invited to speak at a local women's business event. She stood on stage in a sleek suit, gray streaks in her hair, fire still in her eyes. She didn't mention Richard. She didn't need to. After the event, a woman approached her, eyes wet. "I just left my husband of 25 years. You gave me courage I didn't know I had." Maggie squeezed her hand. "You already had it. I just reminded you." Later that night, Maggie opened her journal and wrote the final line to a chapter she'd never thought she'd live through. "I wasn't abandoned. I was reborn." And in that truth, she found her greatest peace. Thank you so much for staying with this story until the very end. I know it's been an emotional journey. Let me ask you, do you think Maggie made the right choice by showing mercy? And if you were, Richard, would you have handled things differently? What did you think of the story overall? If it truly touched your heart, comment number 3 below. Comment number 1 if it didn't work for you, and number 2 if it was just okay. Also, where in the world are you watching this from? I'd love to know which country you're tuning in from. Please don't forget to tap the heart, and share this video with someone who needs to hear Maggie's story.